My daughter-in-law sold all of my late wife's jewelry, and when I confronted her, she said, "What would an old man need with jewelry anyway?" She stood there in my kitchen wearing that cold smile, as if 43 years of memories with Margaret meant absolutely nothing. But that morning, Jessica made a grave mistake. She thought she was dealing with a frail widower who would quietly fade away. She had no idea that a retired heart surgeon could still be sharp enough to notice when something didn't feel right, and what I witnessed that morning would expose the monster hiding behind her perfect smile. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you're watching me, so I can see how far my story has reached. I turned the combination on my bedroom safe the same way I had for 40 years. 3 clicks, right 2 left, 1 back, right. The metallic sound echoed through our Victorian house overlooking San Francisco Bay. But when the heavy door swung open, my heart stopped. Empty, completely empty. The velvet compartments where Margaret's jewelry had rested for decades stared back like hollow sockets. Gone were her emerald earrings from our 20th anniversary. Gone was her mother's pearl necklace, the diamond tennis bracelet, the sapphire ring from David's birth. 43 years of love vanished. My hands trembled as I reached inside, hoping my fingers might find what my eyes could not. Looking for something, Rowan, I spun around. Jessica leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing that smile that never reached her eyes. My daughter-in-law had been living here 6 months, ever since convincing my son David that I needed looking after. My wife's jewelry, I said, voice steadier than I felt. It's not in the safe. Jessica's smile widened. Oh, that old stuff, I sold it. The words hit like a physical blow. You, what? I sold it. Got a good price, too. Those pieces were just gathering dust anyway. Those pieces belong to Margaret. Margaret is dead, Rowan. You need to accept that and move on. She stepped into the room. What's an old man going to do with jewelry anyway? At least now the money can be put to good use. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. This woman who'd never met my wife had dismissed 43 years of memories as old stuff. Good use. David and I have expenses. This house costs money. You're not getting younger, and frankly, you're lucky we're here instead of shipping you off to some nursing home. Footsteps on the stairs. David appeared, sandy-haired, disheveled, still in pajamas. At 35, he had his mother's gentle eyes, but lately they avoided mine. What's going on? He asked, though his expression suggested he knew. Your wife sold your mother's jewelry. David went pale, but didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry either. He looked guilty. Dad, he started, then stopped, glancing at Jessica. Maybe if you weren't so useless around here, David wouldn't need me to handle the finances, Jessica said with disdain. You just sit in this old house living in the past while bills pile up and the real world moves on without you. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend his mother's memory to defend me. Instead, he stared at his feet. I think you should go back to your room, Rowan, Jessica continued. All this excitement isn't good for someone your age. I'll bring you your morning smoothie in a few minutes. Standing in the bedroom I'd shared with Margaret for decades, looking at my son's bowed head and daughter-in-law's triumphant smirk, something crystallized in my chest. Not just anger, though, that was there. Something colder, more focused. Jessica had made a critical error. She thought she was dealing with a helpless old man, someone she could manipulate and rob without consequence. But I hadn't spent 40 years as a heart surgeon, hadn't saved countless lives, hadn't built a reputation for precision and determination, only to be destroyed by a predator in designer clothes. Rowan decided something had to change. As I stood staring at Jessica's cold smile, my mind drifted back to how this nightmare began. 3 years ago, everything changed with one phone call. Dr. Mercer, you need to come to UCSF immediately. Your wife collapsed. Margaret had been buying groceries when the massive stroke hit. By the time I reached the hospital, she was gone. 43 years of marriage ended in a Safeway parking lot. The funeral was a blur. David took it harder than I did. My son had always been sensitive, but losing his mother at 32 shattered him. He'd call crying at 2 a.m., show up disheveled and hollow-eyed, unable to function at his software job. That's when Jessica appeared. I met someone, Dad, David told me 6 months later. She's been helping me through this. Her name's Jessica, and she understands grief. Jessica worked as a home health aide throughout the Bay Area, caring for elderly clients. She'd been taking care of Mrs. Henderson next door when she noticed David sitting on our front steps one evening. I just felt so sorry for him, she told me that first dinner. Losing a mother is devastating. I lost mine when I was young, too. She was beautiful in that polished way, blonde hair, perfectly styled makeup, flawless clothes, expensive but not flashy. When she smiled, she showed perfect white teeth. When she laughed at my Margaret stories, her eyes seemed to shimmer with warmth. Your wife sounds amazing, Dr. Mercer. You must miss her terribly. I did miss Margaret. The house felt enormous without her humming while cooking, without her reading glasses on every surface. Jessica seemed to understand this emptiness. You know what might help, she suggested during her third visit. A morning routine. I make wonderful protein smoothies for my clients, packed with nutrients. Would you like me to make you one? That smoothie became daily ritual. Jessica arrived each morning at 7:30, sharp blender in hand, creating thick greenish concoctions she swore would boost my energy. Dr. Mercer, at 70, you need better nutrition. These have everything: protein powder, spinach berries, special vitamins. I researched the latest health trends for my elderly clients. Within 2 months, David spent every night here. Within 4 months, he'd moved back temporarily to help care for me. By month 5, they'd gotten married at City Hall, a simple ceremony that David claimed was what Mom would have wanted, something small and family-focused. I should have questioned the rush, but David seemed happier than he'd been since Margaret's death. Jessica now had a key and came and went, freely reorganizing our kitchen, rearranging furniture, making herself indispensable as my official daughter-in-law. She's amazing, isn't she, Dad? David would say, watching Jessica bustle around with proprietary confidence. I don't know what we'd do without her. Having someone in the house did ease loneliness. Jessica cooked elaborate meals, kept everything spotless, anticipated our needs. She'd bring my newspaper with my smoothie, adjust the thermostat, even started handling household bills when I mentioned how tedious they'd become. Let me take care of this, Dr. Mercer. You shouldn't worry about utilities and insurance. You're a renowned surgeon. Focus on important matters. Slowly, Jessica wove herself into our daily life. She had opinions about everything: which grocery store, which pharmacy, which investment advisor could maximize my retirement portfolio. Trust me, she'd say with that radiant smile. I've learned so much caring for successful people like yourself. I know what works. And we did trust her. David was grateful to have someone who made him feel less alone. I was relieved to see my son functioning again. Jessica seemed like the answer to our prayers, a caring, competent woman who'd brought light back into our dark house. I never noticed what Jessica was really doing. The days following our confrontation about Margaret's jewelry passed in tense silence. Jessica continued her morning routine as if nothing had happened, arriving precisely at 7:30 with that same brilliant smile and her trusty blender. But something had shifted in me. Her cruel words echoed in my mind. What's an old man going to do? This old man was going to pay attention. On the second morning after discovering the theft, I positioned myself in the hallway outside the kitchen, hidden behind the partially open door to my study. From there, I had a clear view of Jessica's morning preparations while remaining invisible. She moved through our kitchen with practiced efficiency, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator and pantry. Spinach, frozen berries, protein powder, almond milk, all the healthy components she'd always claimed were in my daily smoothie. But then she reached into her oversized purse and withdrew a small glass vial filled with white powder. My breath caught in my throat. Jessica glanced toward the stairway, ensuring David was still in the shower upstairs, then carefully measured out a portion of the mysterious powder. She held it up to the morning light filtering through our bay window, examining it, with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The blender roared to life, drowning out any sound I might have made. I watched transfixed as she added the unknown substance to my smoothie, then cleaned the vial thoroughly with a paper towel before tucking it back into her purse. Rowan, she called sweetly, her voice carrying that same warm tone that had fooled me for months. Your morning boost is ready? I retreated to my study, heart pounding like I was 20 years old again, performing my first solo surgery. When Jessica appeared in the doorway with my usual glass of thick green liquid, I forced my face into what I hoped was a grateful expression. Thank you, dear. You're so thoughtful. Of course you know how much I care about your health. She watched intently as I raised the glass to my lips. Drink it all up. You need your strength. As I sipped the familiar mixture, I tried to detect any unusual taste. There was something slightly bitter beneath the sweetness of the berries, something that hadn't been there in the early days. How long had she been adding this mystery ingredient? Weeks, months? I have some errands to run today, Jessica said, still watching me drink. David's working late again, so it'll just be us for dinner. I'm making your favorite, pot roast. After she left, I sat in my study trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. As a heart surgeon, I'd spent decades analyzing symptoms, following evidence, trusting my instincts when something didn't add up. And right now, every instinct I possessed was screaming that something was very wrong. Over the next 3 days, I became a spy in my own home. I memorized Jessica's patterns, noting when she arrived, where she went, what she touched. I observed how she interacted with David, always affectionate in front of me, but I caught glimpses of impatience when she thought no one was looking. More troubling were the physical changes I'd been ignoring. The fatigue that had been creeping up on me for months, the occasional dizziness, the way my hands sometimes trembled for no apparent reason. I'd attributed these symptoms to grief, to age, to the natural decline that comes with being 70. But now, watching Jessica's careful ritual each morning, I wondered if there was another explanation. On the 4th day, I decided to conduct an experiment. When Jessica brought my smoothie, I pretended to drink it, while actually letting most of it soak into a cloth napkin I'd hidden in my lap. The difference was remarkable. By afternoon, my head felt clearer than it had in months. The persistent brain fog that had been clouding my thoughts began to lift. My hands were steadier. That evening, as I watched Jessica move through our house with that proprietary confidence, touching Margaret's things, rearranging our life to suit her preferences, a cold certainty settled in my chest. I felt something was terribly wrong. By the 6th day after discovering the theft, I couldn't ignore what my medical training was telling me. The mysterious white powder, my improving clarity when I'd skipped the smoothie, the months of unexplained symptoms, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. I was being poisoned. That morning I told Jessica I had a doctor's appointment and drove to my old office at UCSF. The cardiology department felt like stepping back in time. Doctor. Patricia Williams, my former colleague, greeted me with concern. Rowan, you look tired. How are you holding up since Margaret? That's actually why I'm here, Patricia. I need to run some tests on myself, and I need your discretion. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't question me. After 40 years of friendship, she knew I didn't make frivolous requests. In the privacy of an examination room, I methodically cataloged my symptoms like I was evaluating any other patient. Fatigue check. Intermittent nausea check. Visual disturbances. Yes, there had been moments when colors seemed too bright, when I'd see halos around lights. Confusion and memory lapses that I'd attributed to grief. Irregular heartbeat that I'd noticed but dismissed. The pattern was becoming clear, and it chilled me to the bone. Patricia, I need you to draw blood for a comprehensive toxicology screen. Include cardiac glycosides, specifically digitalis compounds. Her face went pale. Rowan, what aren't you telling me? I think someone is trying to kill me. The words hung in the air between us. Saying them out loud made the nightmare real in a way that private suspicion hadn't. Who would... She started, then stopped. Never mind. Let's get your blood drawn. While we waited for the lab results, I sat in my old office staring out at the San Francisco skyline. 40 years I'd worked in this building, saving lives, fighting death. The irony that I might become a victim in my own home wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Hope your appointment goes well. Made extra smoothie for when you get home. XOXO. The casual affection in that message, knowing what I now suspected, made my stomach turn. 2 hours later, Patricia returned with a folder in her hands, and worry etched across her face. Rowan, sit down. I remained standing. Just tell me. Your digitalis level is 3.2 nanograms per milliliter. Therapeutic range is 0.5 to 2.0. You're in the toxic range bordering on potentially lethal. The room seemed to tilt slightly, even though I'd suspected hearing the confirmation was like being punched in the chest. How long? I asked. Based on these levels and your symptoms, I'd say you've been ingesting small amounts regularly for months. Whoever is doing this knows exactly what they're doing. Enough to cause chronic toxicity and gradual decline, but not enough to trigger an acute crisis that would send you to the emergency room. It's my daughter-in-law. She makes me a protein smoothie every morning. Patricia's expression hardened. Rowan, this is attempted murder. You need to call the police. Not yet. I need more evidence. She's clever. She'll deny everything, claim I'm having senior moments, that grief is affecting my judgment. I need proof that will stick. This blood test is proof. It's proof I've been poisoned. It's not proof she did it. I need to catch her in the act. Patricia grabbed my arm. Rowan, you could die. One bad batch one day when she decides to increase the dose, and your heart could stop. I looked at my old friend, this woman who'd stood beside me in countless surgeries, who'd trusted my judgment in life and death situations. Then I better work fast. As I drove home through the familiar streets of San Francisco, past the Victorian houses that had sheltered families for over a century, I realized my situation was far more dangerous than I'd initially thought. Jessica wasn't just stealing from me. She was slowly murdering me. The truth was worse than I had imagined. With digitalis poisoning confirmed in my bloodstream, I had proof of attempted murder, but not proof of the murderer. The next morning, I told Jessica I was visiting old colleagues and spent the day becoming a private investigator. At San Francisco Public Library, I searched Jessica Marie Torres systematically. What emerged made my surgeon's hands tremble for reasons that had nothing to do with poison. Sacramento, 3 years ago, Robert Patterson, 82, died of sudden heart failure while under Jessica's care. His obituary praised his devoted caregiver, who brought comfort in his final months. Stockton, 5 years ago, William Foster, 78, heart attack. Same caregiver mentioned in local news. I drove to an internet cafe in the Mission District, needing untraceable searches. Using research methods learned from forensic colleagues, I dug deeper into death records and employment histories. The truth was staggering. 8 different elderly men across California, Oregon, and Nevada, all wealthy widowers, all died of cardiac events, while Jessica provided compassionate care. All had left her substantial inheritances. My phone call to Detective Mike Rodriguez was brief and urgent. Mike, I need background checks on Jessica Torres, home health aide. Multiple suspicious deaths. Sam, what the hell is going on? I explained quickly. Mike's cop instincts engaged immediately. You're describing a professional killer. How many victims? At least 8 that I've found. All heart failure, all left her money. Stay away from her until I can't leave. She'll know something's wrong. At the Mechanics Institute Library, archived articles revealed Jessica's methodology. She targeted lonely widowers through her healthcare job, gained their trust, isolated them from family, then slowly administered cardiac glycosides, while positioning herself as beneficiary. The most chilling discovery was a blog post from Carol Patterson, Robert's daughter. Dad was healthy when she arrived, played golf twice weekly. Within months, he was weak, confused, completely dependent on her. She convinced him we only wanted his money. He changed his will, leaving her $50,000 plus his car collection. We couldn't prove anything illegal. My blood ran cold reading Carol's words. Jessica had perfected this over years. She knew precise dosages, psychological manipulation techniques, legal loopholes. But this time she'd chosen wrong. Mike texted back, found 3 more cases. Oregon DMV shows Jessica Torres worked for 2 elderly men who died mysteriously. Nevada has 1 confirmed case. Same pattern. Home health aide sudden cardiac death inheritance. This woman is extremely dangerous. I sat in that library realizing a serial killer was sleeping in my house, married to my son, planning my death with the same methodical precision I'd once used in surgery. Another text from Mike, get out now. We'll handle David later. But leaving meant abandoning David to her manipulation. It meant she'd disappear, find another victim, perfect her technique further. And without concrete evidence of her poisoning me specifically, she'd walk free. No, this ended here. I drove home through familiar San Francisco streets, past Victorian houses that had sheltered families for generations, knowing I was returning to a predator's lair. Jessica had killed at least 8 people, possibly more. She'd stolen their final years, their dignity, their lives. She thought she was dealing with another helpless old man who'd fade quietly away, leaving her wealthy and free to hunt again. She was wrong. I knew I had to act fast. Knowing Jessica had murdered at least 8 people changed everything. I couldn't simply confront her with accusations. She'd perfected the art of appearing innocent while her victims died. I needed irrefutable proof. The next morning I drove to Best Buy on Harrison Street. The young sales associate looked puzzled when this 70-year-old man asked about hidden surveillance equipment. Are you looking to monitor a caregiver? He asked tactfully. Something like that. He showed me wireless cameras smaller than matchboxes with smartphone apps for remote viewing. These record in high definition and store footage in the cloud. Motion activated, completely silent. I purchased 3 cameras and spent the afternoon studying the instruction manual like I once studied surgical procedures. Technology might not be my strength, but precision was. That evening, while Jessica prepared dinner and David worked late, I installed the first camera inside our spice cabinet, angled toward the kitchen counter where she prepared my smoothies. The second went behind books on the shelf overlooking the blender area. The third I positioned in the dining room to capture her movements throughout the morning routine. The hardest part was acting normal. When Jessica brought me my evening medication, pills I now realize might also be tampered with, I smiled and thanked her as always. You seem better today, Rowan. More energetic. Just a good day, I suppose. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Had she noticed I'd been skipping the morning smoothies? Was she planning to increase the dosage? The next day, I visited my attorney, Robert Williams, at his Montgomery Street office. We'd worked together on medical malpractice cases for 20 years. Robert, I need to update my will immediately, and I need to discuss a criminal matter. His expression grew serious as I explained the situation. When I finished, he sat back in his leather chair, stunned. Rowan, if what you're telling me is true, you're living with a serial killer. I know. That's why I need everything documented properly. If something happens to me before we can stop her, I want the evidence preserved. We spent 2 hours preparing legal documents, including a detailed statement of my discoveries and instructions for Detective Rodriguez. Robert insisted on calling his contacts at the DA's office to alert them unofficially. We'll need video evidence of her actually poisoning you to make charges stick, he warned. Everything else is circumstantial. I'm working on that. For 3 days, I watched the camera feeds on my phone, learning Jessica's patterns with scientific precision. She arrived at exactly 7:25 each morning, unpacked her supplies, then retrieved that small vial from her purse at 7:31. On the fourth morning, everything aligned perfectly. Jessica glanced around the kitchen, confirming she was alone, then removed the vial. I watched through my phone screen as she held it up to examine the contents. Enough white powder for what she believed would be my final dose. The camera captured everything in crystal clear detail. Her face, the vial, the careful measurement, the deliberate addition to my smoothie. She even smiled as she stirred the mixture, knowing she was preparing my death. But this time I was ready. When she called out, "Rowan, your morning boost is ready," I appeared in the kitchen doorway with my own smile. "Thank you, Jessica. You're so thoughtful." I accepted the glass, raised it toward my lips, then set it down on the counter. Actually, I'm not very thirsty this morning. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely surprised. "But Rowan, you need your vitamins. Your health depends on it." "Does it?" I met her eyes directly. "What exactly is in this smoothie, Jessica?" Something flickered across her face, a shadow of the predator beneath the caring facade. "Just the usual ingredients. Protein, spinach, berries." Her voice remained steady, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. I picked up my phone and showed her the camera app displaying the live feed from the spice cabinet. Her face went white as she realized what she was seeing. "Smile, Jessica. You're on camera." Everything was ready for what I had to do next. Jessica stared at my phone screen, showing her poisoning my smoothie, her perfect mask finally slipping. But I wasn't finished. "David should be here for this conversation," I said, pressing his contact number. "Come home immediately. We need to talk about your wife." While we waited, Jessica tried to regain control. "Rowan, you're clearly having some kind of episode. That video doesn't show anything unusual. I was just making your smoothie." With digitalis powder from a hidden vial, her face went ashen. "I don't know what you're talking about." 20 minutes later, David burst through the front door, followed by Robert Williams and Detective Rodriguez. I'd called them both after setting up this morning's trap. "Dad, what's going on? You sounded frantic on the phone." I looked at my son's worried face, knowing his world was about to shatter. "Sit down, David. There's something you need to know about your wife." Jessica immediately moved to David's side. "Honey, your father is having some kind of breakdown. He's making crazy accusations." "What accusations?" David looked between us, confused. Detective Rodriguez stepped forward, badge visible. "Mr. Mercer, we're here about the allegations you've made regarding attempted murder." David's face went white. "Murder, Dad, what?" "Your wife has been slowly poisoning me with digitalis for months," I said quietly. "She's also a serial killer who's murdered at least 8 elderly men across 3 states using the same method." "That's insane?" Jessica's voice rose to a shriek. "He's senile. He's been acting strange for weeks." I handed Rodriguez my phone with the video queued up. "This was recorded this morning." We all watched as Jessica carefully measured white powder from her vial and stirred it into my smoothie. The camera had captured her satisfied smile as she prepared what she thought would be my final dose. David stared at the screen in horror. "Jessica, what is that?" "It's nothing. It's vitamins, special supplements for his heart condition. Rodriguez pulled out a folder. Mrs. Mercer, we've been investigating your background. Robert Patterson in Sacramento, William Foster in Stockton, 3 men in Oregon, 2 in Nevada. All elderly widowers who died of heart failure while under your care. All left you substantial inheritances. Jessica's composure cracked completely. You can't prove anything. Those were coincidences. We have your employment records, Rodriguez continued. We have death certificates. We have will changes. And now we have video evidence of you poisoning Dr. Mercer. Robert Williams opened his briefcase. We also have Dr. Mercer's blood work showing toxic levels of digitalis, along with documented testimony from his colleague, Dr. Patricia Williams, at UCSF. David stood up shakily. Jessica, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't. She whirled on him, her beautiful face twisted with rage. You pathetic mama's boy. Do you think I married you for love? I needed access to this house, to his money. Your father was supposed to be dead months ago. The raw hatred in her voice made David stagger backward. You were killing my father. He was old, useless. At least his death would have served a purpose. Jessica's careful facade had completely disintegrated. I've worked too hard perfecting this to let some senile old fool ruin everything. Rodriguez moved toward her with handcuffs. Jessica Torres Mercer, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Wait, she screamed. You don't understand. I helped those men. They were lonely forgotten. I gave their deaths meaning. As Rodriguez read her rights, Jessica continued ranting about her victims, confirming details we'd only suspected. David sat down heavily, his face in his hands. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I put my hand on my son's shoulder. She's very good at what she does, David. She fooled a lot of people. As they led Jessica away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time. You think you've won, old man. There are others like me out there. You can't save everyone. Maybe not, I replied. But I saved myself, and now I'll make sure no one else becomes your victim. The door closed behind them, and for the first time in months, my house felt truly quiet. Not the oppressive silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of safety. Justice was finally served. 3 months after Jessica's arrest, I sat in the San Francisco Superior Court, listening to Judge Patricia Martinez deliver the sentence. Jessica Torres Mercer, you have been found guilty on 8 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jessica showed no emotion as bailiffs led her away. The families of her victims filled the courtroom's front rows, sons and daughters who'd lost fathers to her calculated greed. Carol Patterson, Robert's daughter from Sacramento, squeezed my hand as we watched justice close this dark chapter. Thank you for stopping her, she whispered. Dad would be proud. Outside the courthouse, Detective Rodriguez shook my hand. Dr. Mercer, your investigation work was better than most professionals. You saved lives by catching her. David had been by my side throughout the trial, change man carrying the weight of unknowingly enabling a serial killer. That evening, as we sat in our newly redecorated living room, Jessica's cold touches replaced with warm colors Margaret would have loved, he finally spoke what had been in his heart. Dad, I failed you completely. I brought that monster into our home. I let her poison you while I stood by like a coward. I looked at my son, seeing Margaret's gentle eyes filled with genuine remorse. David, she was a professional predator. She studied human psychology, perfected manipulation techniques over years. You weren't weak. You were grieving and vulnerable. But I should have protected you the way you always protected me? You're protecting me now. That's what matters. Our relationship had transformed through this ordeal. David moved back permanently, not as a dependent son, but as a partner in rebuilding our lives. He'd started therapy, found strength he never knew he possessed, and begun dating a kind teacher named Sarah, who brought laughter back to our dinner table. But my own transformation was even more profound. The experience had awakened something I thought I'd lost with retirement. Purpose. I started volunteering at the Senior Community Center on Fillmore Street, teaching elderly residents about financial fraud, prevention, and healthcare scams. My medical background and recent experience made me uniquely qualified to spot predatory behavior. Dr. Mercer said, Martha Henderson, an 80-year-old widow, my new caregiver keeps asking about my bank accounts. Is that normal? Within 2 hours, we'd uncovered another potential Jessica, a home health aide targeting 3 different clients. My call to Detective Rodriguez led to her arrest before she could harm anyone. Word spread through San Francisco's senior community. I became the person families called when something felt wrong with their elderly relatives' caregivers. My Victorian house became an informal headquarters for what David jokingly called Dad's Detective Agency. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica had tried to make me her victim, but instead she'd created her own worst enemy, an elderly man with medical knowledge, legal connections, and nothing left to lose. 6 months after the trial, I established the Margaret Mercer Foundation for Elder Safety, funded partly by recovering assets from Jessica's previous crimes. We provided free background checks for home health aides, educated families about warning signs, and maintained a hotline for reporting suspicious activity. Standing in my study one evening, looking at Margaret's photograph on my desk, I felt her presence more strongly than I had since her death. "We're making a difference, sweetheart," I whispered. "That woman thought she could destroy us, but she only made us stronger." David appeared in the doorway. "Dad, there's a call from Portland. An elderly man thinks his caregiver might be stealing from him." I smiled, reaching for the phone. At 71, I'd found my true calling, not as a retired surgeon fading into irrelevance, but as a guardian protecting the most vulnerable members of our society. Jessica had been wrong about everything. Age hadn't made me useless, it had made me wise. Experience hadn't weakened me, it had armed me with knowledge. And Margaret's love hadn't died with her. It lived on in every person I helped, every predator I stopped, every family I protected. The old man she'd tried to kill had become the warrior she never saw coming. Looking back on this nightmare, I realized that what Jessica intended as my destruction became my greatest awakening. She saw an old man ripe for exploitation, but God had other plans. Sometimes the Lord allows us to face our darkest moments, not to break us, but to reveal strength we never knew we possessed. This betrayal taught me that evil often wears a beautiful mask. Jessica's story isn't unique. Predators targeting the elderly happen more often than we'd like to admit. These betrayal stories remind us that trust must be earned, not freely given. But among all the grandpa stories you might hear, I want mine to stand as proof that age doesn't equal helplessness. The hardest lesson was watching David caught in her web. Betrayal stories like ours show how manipulators divide families, turning loved ones against each other. Yet through God's grace, our relationship emerged stronger. The Almighty works in mysterious ways, even using a serial killer to teach us about forgiveness and redemption. My fellow seniors, we are not disposable. Our years of experience are weapons against those who would harm us. These grandpa stories and betrayal stories we share protect others. When someone treats you as less than human, remember, you've survived decades, raised families, built careers. You have value that no predator can steal. Margaret always said God doesn't give us more than we can handle. Through her memory and His guidance, I found purpose beyond my own survival. Every elderly person I've helped since proves that our stories matter, our wisdom counts, and our lives have meaning until our very last breath. Don't let anyone convince you that your best days are behind you. Sometimes, like me, you're just getting started. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you know, please share it in the comments below. Tell me about the strong seniors in your life, the grandpa stories that inspire you, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the power, wisdom, and resilience of every generation. Your story matters, and I'd love to hear it.